So you've been through the preface of the grounding of the Metaphysics of Morals, and hopefully that's given you some practice reading Kant. But still, as we're getting into the first section here, let's take things kind of slow. Let's see if we can work our way through these first couple of paragraphs, and especially just that first sentence together. So that very first sentence of the first section, where Kant writes, "Nothing can possibly be conceived in the world or even out of it, which can be called good without qualification, except a good will." So what is Kant talking about here? Let's start with that phrase right there in the middle, good without qualification. What does it mean to conceive, or again, imagine something good without qualification? Well, take anything that's good. You tell me, well, ice cream is good. And I say, okay, but is ice cream always good? And you say, well, I mean, certainly, the first scoop or two is usually good, I guess, except if I'm, already really full, or, if it's really cold outside, and notice you're starting to add qualifications, right? Ice cream is good within these parameters. Ice cream is good as long as we qualify that statement. And even there, when you say ice cream is good, you mean ice cream tastes good, right? Not that there's anything morally good about ice cream. So again, there we're putting some qualifications on it. So Kant says we can't even imagine anything good without qualifications, except this one thing, except this thing that he calls goodwill. Now, especially to start to clarify why he says that, I want you to take a look at the rest of the paragraph and notice some of the other things that Kant mentions. Things like intelligence and judgment, things like courage and perseverance, things that our friend Aristotle would have called virtues, right? The intellectual virtues, things like good judgment, and also moral virtues, right? Things like courage and patience. These things, Aristotle says, are good, right? And Kant, and here's the point that he's making over these first two paragraphs. Kant says, well, even those things are only good with qualifications. Well, what qualifications? Well, imagine, Kant says, that there is a villain who is very smart and very courageous. If you have a supervillain or a terrorist or somebody, and they are super smart and they are super courageous, do you look at them and say, well, at least they're smart and courageous? No, and Kant says this makes it even worse, right? If you're going to be a terrorist, I would prefer that you be a coward, right? I would prefer that you be too scared to go through with your plans. And if you're going to be a supervillain, I would prefer you be a really stupid supervillain, right? One who's just not able to come up with the really foolproof schemes. And so Kant says even in those cases, even in cases of what Aristotle called the virtues, it's really only good, we only think of it as good, if a good person has them, right? So if a good person is courageous, that's wonderful. If a bad person is courageous, so much the worse. If a good person is super smart, fantastic. If a bad person is super smart, oh, that's even worse. So, notice here the goodwill, what Kant is calling goodwill, this idea of being a good person. Not only is Kant saying in this first sentence that that is good without qualification, but what we're going to notice is that that goodwill is actually the thing that qualifies so many other things as good. So when is courage good? When courage is directed by the good person, the goodwill. When is intelligence and judgment good? When it is the intelligence and judgment of the goodwill. Even money, right? Kant talks about power and honor and even health, right? He says even these things are only good if they're directed by the goodwill. So, if I'm planning on doing something really terrible, but I wake up tomorrow and I've got the flu and I can't get out of bed, then so much the better, right? If I'm healthy enough to go do terrible things, well, that's a shame. And of course, all of those virtues for Aristotle led to happiness. And here, of course, is where Kant really lets it rip. right? He says the goodwill in that way seems to constitute even the condition of being worthy of happiness. When we see bad people who are successful and happy, Kant says, that upsets us. We say, they don't deserve that happiness. And likewise, and here's the important flip side of that, when you see a genuinely good person struggling in the world, not succeeding, not making ends meet, being unhappy, that strikes you as a problem. You don't say, as a certain Aristotelian might, well, if you're not happy, then you obviously don't deserve it. Instead, you say, this is what's wrong with the world. You deserve so much better than what life has given you. Now remember that this first section is, as Kant puts it, a transition from common rational understanding, common knowledge of morality to a more philosophical mode. And so where we should be beginning here is just our shared intuitions about morality. Remember, Kant is not going to teach you anything about right and wrong in this book. He is simply going to show you how you already judge these things for yourself. And so to start by sort of teasing out the intuition, the shared intuition that Kant is starting with here, let's just think about a couple of examples. I want you to imagine that I go see my grandmother every weekend and I do some grocery shopping for her and I make her dinner and we watch her shows together and I, give her a back rub and I spend all day with grandma and I'm just making grandma so happy. And I think you'd look at me and say, oh, what a good grandson, right? He's just doing right by his grandmother. Now, keeping all of this in mind, I want you to think about what happens in your evaluation of me if one day you find my journal, my diary lying around, and in this diary, I've just got page after page talking about just how much I hate grandma. And I don't like her shows, and I don't like her food, and I don't like her house, and I don't like her company, and she just drives me crazy. But I am going to see her every weekend because my grandma's rich. And I know I'm the only grandkid who goes to see her, and so if I can just hold out for a couple more months or a year or so until she's finally dead, then I know she'll leave me all of that money, and then it will be worth it. Now, I think all of the actions that I'm taking, you could look at those actions and say, well, at the end of the day, he's making grandma happy. So this is not about how you're going to evaluate my actions, but I want to know, how does your evaluation of me as a person change? And now if you're starting to say, well, okay, he's taking the actions of a good grandson, but you're not such a good person, that is the insight that Kant is after here. That's that goodwill, right? Directing my actions. And so right from the beginning, right off the bat, notice that when Kant talks about good here, and when Kant talks about good in this book, we are talking about morality. What Kant is interested in is moral evaluation. And so in that third paragraph, Kant says what makes a goodwill good is not what it accomplishes, but it is good simply by its volition. Now, volition is going to be a word we use a lot as we're talking about Kant, because Kant is going to use this word. What does it mean? It really just means willing. Volition is the power of willing. And so when I will something, when I decide to do something, that is my willpower. That's what we're talking about, volition. And so the goodwill is not good because it accomplishes good things in the world. The goodwill is not good because it makes us take the right actions at the right times. The goodwill, in order to count as good, to qualify as good, the goodwill is going to have to be good in itself, all by itself, just in virtue of the volition itself. Kant is talking about morals. This is a moral evaluation. So when we're talking about you being good or bad, we're talking about your will, your good will, your reasons for doing things, not the actions themselves. And that's going to be so important because, as Kant is going to go on to say over the next few pages, it's really not about what your actions accomplish, it's about why you take them. And when we judge morally, Kant is suggesting, that is already what we judge. I am judging your intentions when I'm morally evaluating what you do. It's not what you do, it's why you're doing it. And so, to come at this from the opposite direction, let's take a very different example. Let's imagine that you are driving through a neighborhood. And you're not out on the highway somewhere, you're in a neighborhood, so you're keeping your speed underneath 25 miles an hour, you are buckled, you are alert, you're looking around, and you don't even have the radio on, you're certainly not texting while driving. And so you are driving, responsibly, paying attention, but as you're driving through this neighborhood, at the last possible second, you could not have foreseen, a child runs out from behind a parked car chasing a ball and collides with your car. Now that child is injured, maybe even dead. And do you feel terrible about this? Of course you feel terrible about this. Something awful has happened in the world and you say, oh, it's my fault. Now, when your friends come around to make you feel better, you know what they're going to say? You can't blame yourself. You didn't mean to do this. You're not a bad person. Now, are your friends just telling you what you want to hear? Certainly not. Your friends are right here. This does not make you a bad person. If you are driving responsibly, if you didn't go out intending to hit a kid, you're not a bad person, even though you have been the direct cause of something bad happening in the world. And so again, notice we're going to start to tease out this difference between the consequences of your actions, even your actions themselves, and the moral evaluation of you. Are you a good person? Are you a bad person? Flip that around one more time. If I get into my car this weekend and my intention is to go out and hit a child with my car, right? I go out hunting in my car, and now I'm driving past a playground and I see a bunch of children playing and I think, here's my target, and I swerve to try to drive into the parking lot or into the park to hit the children, and I don't see hiding behind a bush there is a terrorist or somebody, and I crash my car into the terrorist and now my car won't go and the kids all run away screaming. The media shows up and I've just killed a terrorist and I've saved a bunch of children and I look like the big hero, but does that make me a good person? No, I am still the monster who went out intending to hit children with my car. Even though I failed to accomplish it, I am still an awful person. And so a bad person isn't just someone who does bad things. It doesn't matter if I failed to do those bad things, as long as that was my intention. And likewise, a good person doesn't have to be someone who accomplishes good things. It's the good intention. And so this is going to be really our guide as we work our way into this first section. The goodwill is what makes you morally good. It's about your will. And so the question that we then will start to ask is, well, okay, if that's the case, if it's not about what I do, if it's not about what my actions end up making happen in the world, if it's about my intentions themselves, well then, which intentions are the right intentions? What is it that makes my goodwill good? And here too, and Kant will say again and again, it's not about intending for good things to happen, right? That's not going to be enough by any means. Because look at it this way, if I want good things to happen for you, I can use that to justify all kinds of terrible things that I go out to do, right? You're up for that promotion at work, and I love you, and I want what's best for you, and I want you to get that promotion. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just kill all of your coworkers who are up for the same promotion. I'm gonna wipe them out, make sure you get it. That makes me a good person? No, I'm still a monster. Even though I say, well, I had the best intentions, right? No, I had intentions to help you, but that does not make my intentions good. What are my best intentions? What are the good intentions? What makes the good will good? And so here on the very next page is going to be how Kant sets up the rest of the first section. He'll say we then have to develop the notion of a will, which deserves to be highly esteemed for itself and is good without a view to anything further. Now he says this is a notion which already exists in the sound natural understanding. So again, this is an idea that you and I already share. Kant doesn't have to teach you, he doesn't have to tell you. This is something that we already have in our understanding, an idea we already use, but all we have to do is clarify it. And so the goal of this entire first section is just going to be to take these intuitions that we have about morality, that we use when we judge, and to try to clarify them. Clarifying them is going to be that process of developing nice, tight philosophical questions and philosophical concepts to help us ask those questions. And once we've got those, the sharpened questions and the careful concepts, that's going to be what we'll take with us into the second section in order to really get in and figure out what the supreme principle of morality is. So now let's move into this first section to show how Kant is going to just bring out and clarify this intuition that we have about what it means to have a good will and why that is the only thing that is good without any qualifications, good in itself.